Okay, now let's go and see what the question is, what the offer is, and then find the balance between the two. Let us proceed to the slides. All right, let us commence with the question. What is the deal? The question seeks to understand that straight line which indicates the relationship between price and quantity demanded. So as you can see, the demand function has a negative slope, meaning it goes downwards, because obviously what happens is that as the price increases, the quantity demanded decreases. But now just look at the black one and leave the green one alone for a moment. With price A, you'll get a quantity of 1, meaning that with this very high price, only 1 unit of this good is demanded. However, when the price decreases, the quantities demanded will be 5 units, indicating the inverse relationship between price and demand. Hence, as the price decreases, the quantity demanded tends to increase due to the inverse relationship between price and demand. Is this natural, right? It makes sense, it's a bit for everyone. The lower the price, the more we will demand that good. Let's try to understand the concept of demand. The demand function is usually written as Q as a function of P. What does it mean? It means that the quantity demanded depends on the price. And in fact, we saw this before. An example could be the quantity equal to 100p. As you can see, the higher the price, the lower the quantity will be because we have a negative sign. One thing that can be useful to you is the indirect function. It signifies no longer the quantity in relation to the price, but instead the price in relation to the quantity of the product or service. So from a mathematical standpoint, it is actually very simple, because we take this and it will no longer be Q anymore as a function of P, but it will be P as a function of Q, which is a fundamental concept in mathematics. Why do we need this? Because in certain calculations that we will perform later with additional video courses, we will require the live question feature. Thus, it is advantageous for you to learn it as soon as possible for optimal preparation. At this particular point in time, what we have to ask ourselves is, what the heck is it? What are the factors that influence demand? Obviously, the first variable that influences demand, as we said before, is the price, right? So the lower the price, the greater the quantity demanded, the higher the price, the lower the quantity demanded. But there are also other factors that influence the quantity demanded, like income, for example. It's obvious that the higher the income, the higher the quantity demanded. Now let's make a clarification. I mentioned it's apparent, but we will observe together that it is not as obvious as it initially seems. There are certain types of goods for which as the income level increases, the quantity demanded decreases. However, this is a parenthesis that we will address at a later point in our discussion. At present, what is of significance to you is that income has an effect on the quantity of goods or services demanded. The higher the income, the higher the quantity of goods or services demanded. So at the moment we have observed two variables, namely the price and the income. However, it is important to note that these two variables have distinct effects on the quantity demanded, influencing it in two different manners. Let's take a glance at the chart. Here he is. When the price moves, we witness a movement along the curve. This illustrates the relationship between price and quantity. The lower the price, the higher the quantity, and it's a movement along the curve. When there is a change in income instead of movement, we observe a shift in the curve indicating a different economic scenario. For instance, in the case of income growth, it can be observed that there is a change in the curve. This implies that at the unchanged price, if the price of that specific product remained the same as before, due to the higher income, I would purchase more than just 5 units. Instead, I would buy a slightly larger quantity of the item, thus increasing my overall consumption. So it is not a movement along the curve, it is actually a movement of the curve itself. This phenomenon always occurs when you make a change to a variable on the graph. So in our specific case, either OP or Q, we will observe a movement along the curve's trajectory. If, on the other hand, we experience a change in a variable that is not one of the two variables currently depicted in the graph, such as income, typically represented by M or I, then we will witness a displacement of the curve. Alright, do you have it? I believe this is quite clear. Another factor that influences the quantity of a product people want to purchase is the price of another good or service in the market. Let me give you an example. Here we have to divide between what we call substitute goods or what we call complementary goods or complements. Let's ponder substitute goods. What are they? The substitute goods are precisely and specifically those. A and B are two substitute goods, which means that for you as a consumer, using one or the other doesn't make much of a difference, okay? Yo, I'm at home, we ran out of white sugar, we only have brown sugar, I'll use the brown sugar. One can be substituted for the other, while complementary goods are utilized in conjunction with each other. For instance, the phone and the cover. In the majority of cases, these are utilized together, okay? If I don't have the phone, I don't have the cover either, usually. So let's see how the price movement of a substitute good affects the demand for the other good. Substitute goods, white sugar is our product X, cane sugar is our product Y. If the price of product X, so if the price of white sugar increases, the amount of white sugar you will demand and consume will be lower because you remember the relationship between price and quantity. The higher the price, the lower the quantity. If the price of white sugar goes up, the amount of white sugar goes down. And if you decrease the amount of white sugar, but you still have coffee every day and you need sugar, what will you do? Okay, you will utilize brown sugar. Therefore, the cost of white sugar increases, the quantity of white sugar decreases, and because you have a reduced amount of white sugar, you will need to substitute it with brown sugar. When two goods are substitutes, an increase in the price of one leads to a rise in the quantity of the other, as consumers choose the more affordable option in response to the higher price of the first good. In the complementary goods, we have the phone, which is our product X, and the cover, which is our product Y. What is happening? If the price of the phone increases, generally the quantity of phones demanded, or at least of that type, will decrease. However, if you purchase a smaller number of phones, it is only natural that you will also purchase a smaller number of phone cases. The phone price is increasing while phone quantity is decreasing. And if phone number decreases, cover number will also decrease. With the complementary goods, an increase in the price of one good leads to a decrease in the quantity of the other good. This will also obviously be a curve movement. The last variable that modifies the question are the trends, the tastes. If there is a trend for red jeans at a specific point in time, okay, we will witness a shift in the demand curve. So with the usual price, we will buy more blue jeans precisely because there is fashion. Okay, let's check out the deal, then apply and make an offer together to find a balance. What's the deal? The offer is the quantity that is being offered by the producers. And we have a curve that is increasing. Why? Because this time, the higher the price, the more producers will want to put that product on the market because they can make a bigger profit, a greater profit. So the higher the price, the more companies will want to be in that market, and thus more companies will produce that good, increasing the quantity offered. This is because higher prices enable greater profits, motivating companies to produce more of that good. Usually you write Q as a function of P, so the quantity offered depends on the price. Example, Q equals P minus 20, higher price, higher quantity. On occasion, you might also come across situations where the offer function is indirect, meaning it is not Q expressed as a function of P, but rather P expressed as a function of Q. Even here, from a mathematical point of view, it's very simple because it won't be Q equals P minus 20, but you bring the 20 to the other side and you'll have P equals 20 plus Q. So what is it that influences supply? So first thing is the price. We've seen it. The higher the price, the greater the quantity offered. The second variable that influences the quantity offered is the price of inputs. We said that the offer is the amount offered, produced, offered on the market by the producers. But producers also have costs. They have inputs. Usually in micro, we work with labor and capital. So what is happening? So if I require workers and capital to manufacture a product, I will additionally incur expenses associated with labor, thus to employees and capital. If, for example, salaries were to increase, the costs to produce that product are now higher, and therefore I will produce less of that product, okay? Why does it cost me more? Therefore, the higher the input costs, the lower the quantity offered. And here, the price of the product and the price of the inputs, both of which affect the supply, affect it in different ways. Let's take a look at the chart. What does the flu mean in a different way? If the price of the final product moves, it's a movement along the curve. Why? Why is one of the two variables in our diagram changing its position? But when it comes to moving the price of inputs, so the price of labor, which is usually the wage and is indicated by W, or the price of capital, usually the interest rate indicated by R, these two variables are outside of our diagram, and therefore we will have a movement of the curve. So if, for example, V increases or R increases, so if the cost of input cost increases, we will have a movement of the curve, so we will have the supply shifting to the left. Because in this case, when the cost of the input increases, the quantity offered decreases, and in fact, with the same price. For example, price B, we will have a lower supply on the market compared to before. This change in supply is a direct result of the increased cost of inputs, which leads to a reduction in the quantity of goods available at a given price. Okay? The third factor that impacts the quantity offered is technology and its influential role. Technological advancements are assisting in the process of production. For what reason? Because if before I needed 10 employees to produce this product, and now with a new technology, I only need one machine and one employee, it's obvious that the costs for me are lower, the productivity is higher, and therefore I will put more products on the market with the same effort. So the more technological development there is, the greater the quantity offered will be. Is technological development one of the two variables in the diagram? No. So what's happening? What will be the movement of the supply curve? You can also locate a diagram here that provides a summary of the changes we made to illustrate the modifications. Okay, last part, let's talk about balance. The balance, like in all markets, is demand equals supply. So we take our demand curve, our supply curve, and the point where they intersect will be the equilibrium quantity and the equilibrium price. What would be the outcome if the income were to increase? As we saw earlier, it will result in a movement that follows the shape of a curve. And which curve are you referring to? Referring to the demand curve, 1, 2. So what is happening then? So here is the thing. We are going to have a larger supply in the market and a higher price to match. Another example, if the cost of inputs were to increase, what happens? The supply curve shifts to the left. And this will clearly result in a decreased market equilibrium quantity and an increased market price. So, a tip when you have a doubt about the effect it can have on the equilibrium quantity and equilibrium price following a change in some variable, make a graph because it's the simplest and fastest way, and there are fewer chances to make mistakes because you see it graphically. Alright, final point, small shortcut. When demand and supply increase, it shifts to the right. Sometimes I see kids moving up, moving down. It's just supply and demand. If we look up and down, they move in opposite ways. So remember, demand and supply increase to the right, demand and supply decrease to the left. Okay, we've finished the first part and we'll see you in the second part, which actually would be the third. But in terms of content, it's the second, which is about elasticity.